I found the document by accident while cleaning out Dad's home office. Just a single sheet of paper, really. But seeing Aunt Zuriel's signature next to that astronomical sum made my blood run cold. I'm Eleanor, by the way, and this is how I discovered my family's darkest secret, starting with a wedding invitation that would change everything. Ellie, darling, we simply must discuss Savannah's wedding arrangements. Aunt Zuriel's voice dripped honey over the phone, but I knew better. That tone meant trouble. You've done so well with your business. It's time to give back to the family. I pressed my fingers against my temple, already feeling a headache coming on. What exactly are you suggesting, Aunt Zuriel? Well, as the most financially successful member of our family, we thought you'd want to contribute to Savannah's special day. The venue alone is running us nearly 6 figures. I nearly choked on my coffee. 6 figures? For a venue? It's the Hamilton estate, darling. Savannah has always dreamed of getting married there, and since you've been so blessed, let me get this straight, I cut in, my voice sharp. You want me to fund my cousin's wedding? The same cousin who hasn't spoken to me in 3 years except to comment cute on my Instagram posts? Don't be difficult, Eleanor. Family helps family. Your father agrees with me completely. Of course he did. Dad hadn't made a decision without Aunt Zuriel's approval since Mom died 12 years ago. I'm sorry, but no. I worked hard for my money. I'm not funding an extravagant wedding for someone who barely acknowledges my existence. The honey in her voice crystallized to ice. I see. Well, I'll be sure to let everyone know about your decision? The line went dead before I could respond. I knew what would follow. The passive-aggressive family group chat messages, the disappointed calls from Dad, the guilt-tripping from my sister, Lacey. Right on cue, my phone buzzed. Lacey, please tell me you didn't just refuse to help with Savannah's wedding. She said without preamble, "Hello to you too, sis." Ellie, come on. You know how Aunt Zuriel gets. Just throw some money at it and keep the peace. I stood up from my desk, pacing my home office. Why is it always about keeping the peace? Why am I always the one who has to give in? Because you're the one who can afford to. Lacey's voice rose. Some of us are still struggling to make rent. That's exactly my point. I struggled for years building my business while Savannah was getting her 4th degree funded by Aunt Zuriel. Now suddenly, I'm supposed to bankroll her dream wedding? You're being selfish. No, I'm being reasonable. I stopped pacing, my eye catching on Dad's office door across the hall. I'd been helping him organize since he mentioned selling the house. Look, I need to go. I'm at Dad's place sorting through papers. After hanging up, I pushed open the office door, the familiar scent of old books and leather hitting me. That's when I saw it. A paper had slipped partially under the ancient filing cabinet. I wouldn't have noticed it if the corner hadn't been sticking out. Pulling it free, I found myself staring at what looked like a bank statement. But the numbers? They didn't make sense. According to this, Aunt Zuriel had accessed over $2 million from what appeared to be a family trust fund, money I'd never known existed. The date on the document was from just after Mom died. My phone buzzed again. Dad. Eleanor, honey, about Savannah's wedding. Dad? I interrupted, my voice steady despite my racing heart. I need to ask you something. What do you know about a family trust fund? The silence on the other end lasted so long I thought the call had dropped. Then, barely above a whisper, "Where did you find that?" So it's real? The $2 million Aunt Zuriel took? Eleanor, listen to me very carefully. Dad's voice shook. Don't mention this to anyone, especially not your aunt. Some things are better left in the past. But as I stared at the damning evidence in my hands, I knew this was just the beginning. They wanted me to fund a wedding? Fine. But first, I was going to uncover exactly what happened to those millions, and why nobody had ever thought to mention them to me. The wedding invitation sat on my desk, mocking me with its gold-foiled elegance. Well, Aunt Zuriel, you wanted me involved in this wedding? Be careful what you wish for. You're sure about this? Gregory leaned back in his chair, frowning at the document I'd spread across his desk. As my company's financial advisor, he'd become one of my most trusted confidants over the years. $2 million is a lot of money to just disappear. Look at the signature, I pointed. That's definitely Aunt Zuriel's. And the date, it's exactly 2 weeks after Mom's funeral. He pulled out his reading glasses, examining the paper more closely. Your mother's death. Was it unexpected? Car accident. The words still tasted bitter. At least, that's what we were told. Dad was a mess afterward, basically handed everything over to Aunt Zuriel to handle. Including the finances, Gregory murmured, more to himself than to me. He looked up suddenly. Give me a few days. I know some people who can dig deeper into this. My phone buzzed. Another message from Lacey. Family dinner tonight. Don't you dare skip this one. I showed Gregory the text. Want to bet this is an ambush about the wedding? Go, he said, carefully folding the document. Keep them thinking everything's normal while I look into this. The family home looked exactly as it always had, pristine lawn, perfect flowers, and enough tension in the air to power a small city. Savannah's car was already in the driveway. Eleanor, Aunt Zuriel's voice carried across the front yard as I got out of my car. How nice of you to join us. Inside, Savannah sat at the dining room table, surrounded by wedding magazines. She barely glanced up as I entered. Oh, hi, Eleanor. Have you reconsidered about the wedding? I wasn't aware there was anything to reconsider. I took a seat across from her, noting how Aunt Zuriel hovered nearby. My answer hasn't changed. But the Hamilton estate, Savannah whined. It's perfect, and they need the deposit by next week. Then I suggest you find a more affordable venue. Aunt Zuriel's hand came down hard on the table. That's enough. Eleanor, may I speak with you in private? She practically dragged me into Dad's office, shutting the door behind us. Listen here, you ungrateful child. After everything this family has done for you, what exactly has this family done for me? I interrupted, my voice low but firm. Because from where I'm standing, I built my business alone while you poured money into Savannah's endless education. Is that what this is about? Jealousy? My phone vibrated in my pocket. Gregory. I ignored it. No, Aunt Zuriel, this is about fairness. And speaking of money, I watched her face carefully. Whatever happened to Mom's trust fund? She went very still. What trust fund? The one you accessed 2 weeks after she died. $2 million. That's a lot of money to disappear without a trace. The color drained from her face, but she recovered quickly. I have no idea what you're talking about. Your mother had no such fund. Really? Because I found the document with your signature. Before she could respond, my phone buzzed again. This time I checked it. Gregory. Urgent. Found something big. Offshore account in Cayman Islands. Call me ASAP. This conversation isn't over, I told Aunt Zuriel, moving toward the door. She grabbed my arm. Eleanor, wait. Perhaps we can discuss this. Come to an arrangement. An arrangement? About the wedding. Maybe if you helped with the venue, we could ensure certain old documents remain private. I stared at her, disgusted. Are you trying to blackmail me into paying for the wedding? I'm trying to protect this family, she hissed. Some things are better left in the past. Dad's exact words. What were they so desperate to hide? Eleanor? Lacey's voice called from the dining room. Where did you go? We'll finish this later, Aunt Zuriel said, straightening her blouse. And Eleanor, remember, family loyalty goes both ways. I waited until she left before calling Gregory. Eleanor, you're not going to believe this, he said without preamble. That money? It wasn't just transferred once. There have been regular deposits to an offshore account for the past 12 years. Most recent one was last month. My hands started shaking. How much? Total? Close to $5 million by now. And here's the kicker. The account name is Montgomery Holdings. Montgomery, Aunt Zuriel's married name. There's more, Gregory continued. I found some old insurance documents. Your mother's accident. Eleanor, there was a 7-figure life insurance policy, paid out to Zuriel Montgomery as trustee. The room seemed to spin, all these years of struggling, of building my business from nothing, while Aunt Zuriel sat on millions, our family's millions. Eleanor? Gregory's voice softened. What do you want to do? I thought about Savannah's entitled demands, Dad's silence, Aunt Zuriel's threats. Keep digging, I said. I want everything. The family pressure intensified over the next week. Constant calls, guilt-tripping texts, even a tearful visit from Savannah herself. But it was Lacey showing up at my door at midnight that finally broke the pattern. I need a drink, she announced, pushing past me into my apartment. Her mascara was smeared, and she clutched her purse like a lifeline. I poured us both a glass of wine. What happened? Aunt Zuriel happened. Lacey took a long sip. She came by my place today, started asking weird questions about you, about what you've been saying to me. What kind of questions? About Mom, mostly, and money. She set down her glass hard enough to slosh wine onto my coffee table. She offered to help with my rent if I'd keep an eye on you. I felt my jaw clench. And I told her to shove it. Lacey's eyes filled with tears. But Ellie, there's something else. Something I should have told you years ago. I sat down beside her, my heart pounding. What? Remember when I was trying to start my photography business right after college? She wouldn't meet my eyes. I went to Aunt Zuriel for a loan. She agreed, but then she made me sign these papers. I didn't really read them. I was so desperate. What papers, Lacey? I think they were about Mom's estate, some kind of waiver of rights. She wiped her eyes. The business failed anyway, and Aunt Zuriel held that loan over my head for years. But tonight, when she tried to bribe me again, something clicked. Why does she have so much money to throw around? I got up and retrieved the trust fund document from my office. Lacey's hands shook as she read it. $2 million? She whispered. But we struggled so much after Mom died. You worked 3 jobs to start your business. I had to drop out of art school. It gets worse. I told her about Gregory's discovery of the offshore account and the insurance policy. Lacey cut herself off, standing up suddenly. We need to check Mom's old things, now. It's midnight. Dad's at his poker game. He won't be home for hours. We need to look while Aunt Zuriel isn't hovering around. 20 minutes later, we were in Mom's old craft room, now used for storage. Lacey went straight to the back corner, pulling out a dusty box. Mom's journals, she explained. I found them years ago but never read them. It felt too private then. We spent the next hour flipping through pages of our mother's elegant handwriting. Most entries were ordinary, daily life, concerns about us kids, little observations about the world. Then I found it. Listen to this, I said, reading aloud. Zuriel's been asking about the trust again. Says Norman's business is in trouble, needs capital. I can't tell if she's lying. She always was good at that. But I made that trust for the girl's future. I won't let her touch it. I looked at the date. This was 3 weeks before the accident. Lacey grabbed the journal. There's more. Found discrepancies in the business accounts today. Large transfers I can't trace. When I asked Zuriel about them, she got defensive. Something's not right. Meeting with my lawyer tomorrow to... She turned the page. That's the last entry. My phone rang, making us both jump. Gregory, Eleanor, I found something disturbing. Those insurance documents? There was an investigation into your mother's accident, but it was suddenly dropped. The detective in charge received a large payment to an offshore account 2 days later. The journal slipped from my hands. That's not all, Gregory continued. I've been tracking the money trail. Most of those millions, they've been funding Savannah's lifestyle, designer clothes, luxury cars, that string of failed businesses she started. But there's a pattern of smaller payments, too, to people who might ask questions. Like the detective, I said numbly. Exactly, Eleanor. I think this goes deeper than simple embezzlement. Lacey was still reading the journal, her face getting paler by the page. Ellie, she interrupted, look at this. She pointed to a loose paper tucked into the binding, a handwritten letter. If anything happens to me, I read aloud, the truth is in the blue box. Love, Mom. Lacey and I stared at each other. The blue music box, she whispered. The one Mom always kept locked. Aunt Zuriel took it after the funeral, said it was worthless. Where is it now? In her house, in that cabinet of collectibles she never lets anyone touch. I spoke into the phone. Gregory, we need to get into Aunt Zuriel's house. Eleanor, his voice was worried. Be careful. People who pay off detectives? I know. I looked at Lacey, saw my own determination reflected in her eyes. But Mom tried to warn us. It's time we found out why. I found Dad in his usual spot, the back porch, nursing a whiskey, staring at Mom's old garden. The journals felt heavy in my bag as I sat beside him. You knew, didn't you? I kept my voice gentle, but he flinched anyway. About the money, about all of it. He took a long drink before answering. Your mother never trusted Zuriel with money. Said she was too creative with numbers. Is that what we're calling fraud now? Creative? Eleanor? No. I pulled out Mom's journal. I found these. She knew something was wrong with the business accounts. She was going to meet a lawyer. I paused, watching his face. The next day, she died. The glass slipped from his hand, shattering on the porch. Don't. Please. The detective who investigated her accident got a payoff, Dad. An offshore payment, just like the millions Aunt Zuriel's been hiding all these years. He buried his face in his hands. I didn't know, not at first. When did you find out? About a year after your mother. His voice cracked. I found some papers like you did. When I confronted Zuriel, she had explanations, said your mother had been embezzling, that she'd fixed everything to protect the family name. And you believed her? The words came out sharper than I intended. I didn't want to believe anything else. He looked at me finally, eyes red. If what you're suggesting is true, if my own sister, show me the papers. He led me to his office, hands shaking as he opened a hidden safe behind a painting. I kept copies, never knew why, maybe part of me. The documents were damning, not just of Aunt Zuriel's theft, but of her elaborate cover-up. Transfer records, falsified statements, even a letter from Mom's lawyer about scheduling an urgent meeting that never happened. All these years, I said quietly, while Lacey and I struggled, while you remortgaged the house. Aunt Zuriel had millions of our money, and you said nothing. She's still my sister. And Mom was your wife. The words exploded out of me. We were your daughters. We needed you to fight for us. A noise from the doorway made us both turn. Lacey stood there, tears streaming down her face. Is it true? She asked Dad. Did you know about the money? He couldn't meet her eyes. Lacey, honey. My phone buzzed. A text from Gregory. Urgent. Just found email correspondence between Zuriel and the mechanic who worked on your mom's car the week before the accident. Call me now. Before I could process that, Another message popped up, this one from an unknown number. Stop digging. Some questions shouldn't be answered. I showed both messages to Dad. The color drained from his face. The mechanic, he whispered. I remember. Your mother complained about the brakes feeling strange. Zuriel recommended her personal mechanic. Lacey made a choking sound. Are you saying Aunt Zuriel might have? We need that blue music box, I cut in. The one Mom mentioned in her letter. It's in Aunt Zuriel's house. Dad stood up suddenly. I have a key to Zuriel's house for emergencies. Dad, no, Lacey protested. If she finds out, she's at her bridge club every Thursday afternoon, he said, moving to his desk. For years I've kept quiet, let her control everything. But if my sister had anything to do with your mother's. He pulled out a key ring, hands steadier now. It's time I chose my daughters. My phone buzzed again. Gregory, don't respond to any threats. I'm documenting everything. But Eleanor, be careful. These people play for keeps. I looked at Dad, still holding the key like it might burn him. At Lacey, wiping tears but standing straighter. At Mom's journal, full of warnings she'd tried to leave us. Tomorrow's Thursday, I said. We go in, find the box, get out. No one needs to know. And then what? Lacey asked. I thought about Savannah's wedding, now just weeks away. About Aunt Zuriel's smug demands and threats. About 12 years of struggling while she lived off our mother's money. Then we get justice, I said. For Mom, for all of us. Dad nodded slowly, placing the key in my hand. Your mother would be proud of you both. She always said truth finds its way to light. Like water, Lacey whispered, quoting Mom's favorite saying. It always finds a crack to flow through. Tomorrow, we'd find more than cracks. We'd blow the whole dam wide open. The key trembled in my hand as we stood at Aunt Zuriel's back door. Thursday afternoon, right on schedule, we'd watched her luxury sedan pull away for Bridge Club. 15 minutes, Gregory reminded us through the phone's speaker. He'd insisted on staying connected. Any longer and we risk her coming back. The lock clicked open. Lacey grabbed my arm. Wait, security system. Dad stepped forward, punching in the code. She never changes it. Our mother's birthday. The irony wasn't lost on any of us. Aunt Zuriel's house was exactly what you'd expect. Expensive, immaculate, and cold. The cabinet of collectibles dominated her formal living room, dozens of precious trinkets displayed behind glass. There, Lacey pointed. Top shelf, far right. Mom's blue music box sat exactly where Lacey remembered, gathering dust among crystal figurines. The cabinet was locked. Now what? Lacey whispered. I pulled out the ring of keys Dad had given me. She keeps everything, he'd said, never throws away a single key. The third key fit. 10 minutes, Gregory warned. The music box was heavier than I remembered. No key in sight. Here, Dad pulled out his wallet, extracting a small key from behind his credit cards. Your mother gave me this, said to keep it safe. My hands shook as I inserted the key. The lid opened with a familiar melody, Mom's favorite lullaby. Inside, beneath a stack of old photos, we found a USB drive and a sealed envelope with "For my daughters," written in Mom's handwriting. 7 minutes, Gregory said. You need to... He cut off abruptly as the sound of a car door slamming echoed from outside. She's back, Lacey hissed. Bridge Club must have canceled. Dad grabbed the USB and envelope, stuffing them in his pocket. Put the box back, exactly as it was. I closed the cabinet just as keys jingled in the front door. We rushed toward the back, but Aunt Zuriel's voice rang out. Hello? Is someone here? Footsteps approached the living room. Dad pushed us toward the kitchen. Go, I'll handle her. Dad, go. We slipped out the back door just as we heard Aunt Zuriel's surprised. Norman, what are you doing here? Lacey and I didn't stop running until we reached my car, parked 2 blocks away. Gregory was still on the line. Eleanor, what happened? We got it, I gasped. But Dad, he stayed behind. Smart move, Gregory said. He can explain his presence without raising suspicion. You two couldn't. My phone dinged with a text from Dad. All clear. Told her I was dropping off wedding RSVPs, meeting you at your place. 20 minutes later, we huddled around my dining room table. The USB drive contained exactly what we'd suspected: financial records, emails, and a video file of Mom speaking directly to camera. My darling girls. Mom's face filled the screen, looking exactly as I remembered. If you're watching this, something has happened to me. I've discovered serious financial irregularities in the family business. Your Aunt Zuriel has been embezzling funds for years, using offshore accounts and false documentation. I'm meeting with lawyers tomorrow, but I'm afraid. Strange things have been happening. My car's been acting weird. I've received threatening notes. If anything happens to me, take this evidence to the authorities. Protect yourselves, and know that I love you both so much. The video ended. Lacey was sobbing. Dad looked like he'd aged 10 years. There's more, Gregory said, examining the financial records. These show systematic theft going back decades. But this is the smoking gun. He pointed to a series of transfers. Money from your mother's accounts to the mechanic who worked on her car, then to the detective, all traced back to Zuriel's offshore account. She killed her, Dad whispered. My own sister murdered my wife. My phone buzzed. Aunt Zuriel, we need to talk, now, about what you took from my house. Another message followed. Don't do anything rash, Eleanor. Think about the family, about Savannah's wedding, about your father's reputation. She knows, Lacey said. Good, I replied, surprising everyone. Let her worry. Let her wonder what we found, what we know. What's our next move? Gregory asked. I thought about Mom's video, about years of struggle, about Aunt Zuriel's smug manipulation. Savannah's wedding is in 2 weeks, I said. Everyone will be there. Family, friends, business associates, the perfect audience. Eleanor, Dad warned, if you're thinking what I think you're thinking. She used our mother's funeral to steal our inheritance, I cut in. It seems fitting to use her daughter's wedding to expose the truth. My phone buzzed again. Aunt Zuriel. Last chance, Eleanor. Name your price. I showed them the message, then typed my reply. You're right, Aunt Zuriel. Family helps family. See you at the wedding. You're really going through with this? Gregory asked, adjusting my dress strap at the wedding rehearsal dinner. We'd decided to attend as a couple to avoid suspicion, though the way he looked at me suggested it wasn't entirely an act. Watch Aunt Zuriel, I whispered. She hasn't taken her eyes off us all evening. Sure enough, my aunt sat at the head table, pretending to listen to the wedding planner while shooting nervous glances our way. The past 2 weeks of silence had clearly unnerved her. Eleanor, Savannah's voice cut through the crowd. I can't believe you actually came. And who's this? My date, Gregory. I smiled sweetly. I decided to contribute to your wedding after all. I'm preparing quite the surprise. Savannah squealed, missing the tension in my voice. I knew you'd come around. Did you hear that, Mom? Eleanor's going to help. Aunt Zuriel's wine glass froze halfway to her lips. How generous of her. Oh, it's the least I can do for family. I met her gaze. Mom always said family was everything. The glass shook slightly in her hand. Later, as guests mingled around the restaurant's bar, Lacey pulled me aside. Logan's asking questions. Savannah's fiancé? About what? He overheard Dad on the phone with his lawyer. He's worried about the family's financial situation. I glanced at Logan across the room. handsome, successful, and completely unaware he was marrying into a family built on murder and theft. "Should we warn him?" Lacey asked. "He'll find out tomorrow with everyone else." "Eleanor." Dad appeared beside us, his face grave. "Zuriel's asking to speak with you. In private. Perfect timing." I pulled out my phone, starting the recording app. "Where?" "The restaurant's wine cellar. But be careful." "I've got this." I squeezed his hand. "Gregory?" He nodded, positioning himself near the cellar entrance as I descended the stairs. Aunt Zuriel waited between racks of expensive wines, looking oddly vulnerable in the dim light. "Name your price," she said without preamble. "Excuse me?" "For whatever you found in that music box, whatever you think you know." She opened her designer purse. "I can write a check right now." "Like the check you wrote to Mom's mechanic?" She stiffened. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Or the detective? How much does it cost to cover up a murder these days?" "Murder?" She laughed, but it sounded hollow. "Your mother's death was an accident." "Was it?" "Because we have proof of payments to the mechanic who tampered with her brakes, proof of millions stolen from her accounts, proof of your offshore holdings." I stepped closer. "We even have Mom's video testimony." The color drained from her face. "You're bluffing. "Wanna bet Savannah's perfect wedding on that?" "You wouldn't dare." Her voice turned harsh. "Think about what this would do to the family, to your father, to Savannah's big day. Like you thought about us, while we struggled, while Lacey dropped out of school, while Dad remortgaged his house. You lived off Mom's money, money meant for us." "I deserved that money." The words exploded from her. "I built that business with your father, while your mother played artist and homemaker." Then she started asking questions, threatening to expose everything. My phone kept recording as Aunt Zuriel's careful facade cracked. "She would have ruined everything," she continued. "The business, our reputation, Savannah's future. I couldn't let that happen." "So you had her killed." She flinched. "I protected this family. Everything I did was for—" "Save it for tomorrow," I cut in, turning toward the stairs. "Tomorrow?" "At the wedding, when everyone learns the truth." "I'll stop you," she called after me. "I've done it before." I turned back, letting her see my phone. "Thanks for the confession, Aunt Zuriel. It'll go great with Mom's video." Her face contorted. "You little—" "Everything okay down here?" Gregory's voice carried from the top of the stairs. "Perfect," I replied, climbing up. "Just finalizing my wedding contribution." Back in the main room, Lacey and Dad waited anxiously. "Did you get it?" Lacey whispered. I played them a snippet of the recording. Dad closed his eyes, tears sliding down his cheeks. "What now?" Gregory asked, his hand finding mine. "Now we go home and prepare for tomorrow." I watched Aunt Zuriel emerge from the cellar, her perfect mask back in place as she fussed over Savannah's seating arrangements. Mom always said weddings were about families coming together. Time to show everyone exactly what kind of family we really are. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. "Last warning, back off or face the consequences." I deleted it without replying. Tomorrow, the only consequences would be Aunt Zuriel's to face. The Hamilton estate glittered with fairy lights as guests filed into the grand ballroom. Aunt Zuriel had spared no expense, our expense technically, on Savannah's perfect day. "Everything's ready," Gregory whispered, squeezing my hand. He'd set up the audio-visual equipment under the guise of preparing a wedding slideshow. "Just say the word." I watched Aunt Zuriel flutter around the room, checking last-minute details. She'd been avoiding my eyes all morning, but I caught her nervous glances toward the presentation screen. "Eleanor!" Savannah appeared in a whirlwind of white tulle. "Where's your surprise? You promised." "After the ceremony," I assured her. "Trust me, no one will forget it." The wedding proceeded like a fairy tale. Savannah floated down the aisle while Logan beamed. Aunt Zuriel dabbed at her eyes with an expensive handkerchief. Dad sat rigid beside me, his face a mask of barely contained emotion. Then came the reception. "Ladies and gentlemen," the DJ announced, "before the first dance, we have a special presentation from the bride's cousin, Eleanor." Aunt Zuriel half rose from her seat. "Wait." I stepped to the microphone. "Family means everything to us," I began, my voice steady. "So I wanted to share some recently discovered family history." The lights dimmed, the screen flickered to life. Mom's face appeared, 12 years younger but unmistakable. Several guests gasped. "My darling girls," her recorded voice filled the ballroom. "If you're watching this, something has happened to me." I watched Aunt Zuriel's face as Mom detailed the financial theft. The color drained from her cheeks when the evidence appeared. Bank statements, transfer records, emails about brake tampering. Then came last night's recording. "I deserved that money," Aunt Zuriel's voice rang out. "I couldn't let her expose everything." The room erupted in murmurs. Savannah stood frozen, her perfect makeup streaking with tears. Logan wrapped an arm around her, his lawyer's mind clearly processing the implications. "Security!" Aunt Zuriel shouted, standing. "Stop this immediately." "Security's been informed," Gregory called out, "along with the police." As if on cue, blue lights flashed outside the estate's windows. "You're lying," Aunt Zuriel snarled, but her voice shook. "This is all fabricated." "Like the accident report?" Dad stood, his quiet voice carrying across the stunned room. "Like the detective's investigation? Like the mechanic's sudden retirement to Florida?" "Norman, please," she pleaded. "Think about what you're doing to this family. You killed my wife." His words fell like stones in water. "You stole from my daughters. You are not my family." Savannah stumbled forward. "Mom, what did you do?" "Everything I did was for you." Aunt Zuriel reached for her daughter. "To secure your future, to give you the life you deserved." "With blood money?" Savannah recoiled. "With Aunt Sarah's life." "Mrs. Montgomery?" A detective appeared at the ballroom entrance. "We need you to come with us." "This is ridiculous." She backed away. "You have no proof." "Actually," Gregory stepped forward, "we have 12 years of financial records, witness statements from the mechanic and detective, both willing to talk in exchange for deals, and your own recorded confession. Plus Mom's video testimony," Lacey added, her voice strong. "Recorded the day before you had her killed." The detective moved closer. "Ma'am, please don't make this more difficult." Aunt Zuriel bolted. She made it halfway to the side exit before security caught her. As they led her away in handcuffs, she screamed back at me, "You ungrateful brat, after everything I did for this family." "You did nothing for this family," I cut in, my voice carrying over her protests. "You destroyed it, for money, for control, for your own selfish desires." The ballroom sat in shocked silence as police escorted her out. Savannah collapsed into Logan's arms, her dream wedding transformed into a nightmare. Dad stood stone-faced, watching his sister's departure. Lacey gripped my hand, both of us fighting tears. "I'm so sorry," I told the stunned guests. "But Mom always said truth finds its way to light, like water through cracks." "Through cracks," Dad echoed softly, and several old family friends nodded, remembering Mom's favorite saying. As the police lights faded into the distance, Gregory wrapped an arm around my waist. "You okay?" I looked at my shattered family, Dad's quiet strength, Lacey's fierce loyalty, even Savannah's dawning comprehension of her mother's true nature. "No," I answered honestly, "but we will be, because that's what Mom would have wanted. Not revenge, but justice. Not destruction, but truth." and as the last rays of sunset painted the Hamilton estate in golden light, I felt her presence, finally at peace. The morning sun streamed through Mom's craft room windows as I sorted through boxes with Savannah. She'd shown up at dawn, still in yesterday's wedding dress, asking to help clean out the family home. I found more photos, she said, pulling out an album. Look at this one. You, me, and Lacey at the beach. Before everything. Before your mom turned us against each other. I finished gently. She traced the photo's edge. I keep thinking about all those times she told me I deserved the best. That Eleanor's just jealous. That Lacey's not ambitious enough. Her voice cracked. It was all built on Aunt Sarah's death. The police called this morning, I told her. Your mom's talking, trying to cut a deal. Good. Savannah's voice hardened. Let her talk. Let her face everything she did. The doorbell rang. Logan stood outside, looking exhausted but determined. I've been up all night, he said, stepping inside, going through the financial records Gregory sent over. The extent of the fraud. He shook his head. But I think I found a way to make things right. Dad appeared from his office. What do you mean? The money can be traced, recovered. It'll take time, but as a corporate lawyer, I can help navigate the legal process. He took Savannah's hand. If you'll let me. You still want to marry me? She whispered. After all this? I want to marry you, not your mother's crimes. He smiled slightly. Maybe something smaller than yesterday's event? A knock at the door revealed Gregory, carrying coffee and pastries. Thought everyone could use breakfast. Also, I have news. We gathered in the kitchen as he spread out documents. The offshore accounts are frozen. The insurance company's reopening the investigation into Sarah's death. And, he pulled out a letter. The family business board wants to talk about reinstating Norman as CEO. Dad stared at the letter. I don't know if I can. You can, Lacey said from the doorway. She carried a familiar blue box. Look what I found in Mom's things. Inside the music box lay another envelope we'd missed, marked for Norman. Dad's hands shook as he read Mom's letter. My dearest Norman, if you're reading this, stay strong. The business was your dream before Zuriel twisted it. Don't let her take that from you, too. Lead with honesty, like you always wanted to. She knew, I realized. She knew you weren't part of Aunt Zuriel's schemes. The board meeting's next week, Gregory said. I'll help prepare the financial recovery plan. We all will, Logan added. As a family. Savannah wiped her eyes. Can we use Mom's stolen money to help people? Set up a foundation in Aunt Sarah's name? Already working on it, Gregory smiled. Eleanor had the same idea. The doorbell rang again. This time it was the detective. Thought you'd want to know, he said. Zuriel's given us everything. The mechanic, the cover-up, all of it. She'll be going away for a long time. And the money? I asked. Recovery process starts today. You'll need good lawyers. We've got that covered, Logan and Gregory said together. After the detective left, we sat in Mom's garden, sharing coffee and memories. The morning sun caught the wind chimes she'd loved, creating music from light. I keep thinking about karma, Lacey mused. How everything Aunt Zuriel did to control us just led to this moment, to us being stronger together. Mom would have loved that, I said, the truth setting us free. Speaking of truth, Gregory took my hand. Remember our first fake date at the rehearsal dinner? I'd like to make it real. Maybe start with coffee. Dad chuckled, his first real laugh in days. Sarah always said you two would end up together. She saw things clearly. Unlike some people, Savannah added, then bit her lip. Sorry, too soon for jokes about Mom? No, I squeezed her hand. We need to be able to talk about it, all of it. And then move forward, Logan said. Together. Dad stood, looking at Mom's garden. Sarah loved this place, said every flower had its season. He touched a blooming rose. Maybe it's our season now, to bloom again. Without the poison of secrets, Lacey added, or the weight of stolen money, Savannah said, or the fear of speaking truth, I finished. Gregory raised his coffee cup. To Sarah, who taught us that family isn't about control or money. To Mom, we echoed, who showed us that truth, like water, always finds its way. The wind chimes sang in harmony, and somewhere I knew Mom was smiling. Her garden would bloom again, nourished by truth instead of lies, by love instead of fear, and this time we'd tend it together.
My name is Barbara, and 3 years ago, I had what most people would consider a dream life. I was married to Michael, a successful businessman who made enough money for us to live in a beautiful house in the suburbs. We had an adorable 3-year-old son, Tommy, with his father's dark hair and my green eyes. Before Tommy was born, I worked as an accountant at Anderson and Partners, a prestigious firm downtown. I loved my job, the satisfaction of balancing books, the friendly office environment, the sense of independence it gave me. Everything changed after Tommy's birth. Michael started insisting that I should stay home. "Barb, we don't need the money," he said one evening, bouncing Tommy on his knee. "Our son needs his mother at home. That's more important than any career." I wasn't entirely convinced, but then my parents jumped on the bandwagon too. Mom called me almost every day, telling me how lucky I was. "Barbara, honey, do you know how many women would kill to be in your position?" she'd say. "You have a wealthy husband who wants you to focus on your family. That's a blessing." But it was my younger sister Linda's words that finally tipped the scales. We were having coffee in my kitchen while Tommy napped upstairs. Linda, 2 years my junior and perpetually single, stirred her coffee thoughtfully. "God, Barb, you're living my dream," she sighed. "I'd give anything to marry someone like Michael. Stay home, take care of the house, raise kids. You're so lucky you don't have to work anymore." I remember looking at her that day, her perfectly manicured nails, designer clothes bought with our parents' money, not a care in the world. Linda had always been the pretty one, the social butterfly. I was the responsible older sister, the one who worked hard and played by the rules. So I quit my job. The first few months were nice, I suppose. I threw myself into being the perfect housewife and mother. I made elaborate meals, kept the house spotless, and spent hours playing with Tommy. Michael seemed pleased, always coming home with a smile and a kiss. But 6 months into my new life as a stay-at-home mom, things started to feel off. It was subtle at first, so subtle I thought I was imagining things. Michael started spending more time on his phone, smiling at messages when he thought I wasn't looking. He'd step out of rooms to take calls, speaking in hushed tones. One evening, when he hugged me after coming home late from another meeting, I caught a whiff of perfume. Not just any perfume, something familiar, a scent that tugged at my memory. But I couldn't place it, and I tried to convince myself I was being paranoid. "You're being ridiculous," I told myself, watching him play with Tommy on the floor. "He's just busy with work. Everything's fine." But deep down, in that place where we keep the truths we're not ready to face, I knew something was wrong. I just had no idea how wrong, or how much my perfect life was about to implode. The suspicion was eating me alive. Every time Michael's phone buzzed, my stomach would clench. Every late meeting felt like a lie. I tried to push these thoughts away, but they kept creeping back, especially at night when I lay awake beside him, listening to his steady breathing and wondering what he wasn't telling me. One evening, while Michael was taking his shower, I could hear the water running upstairs. I did something I'd never done before. I sat down at his laptop in his home office and logged into his work chat. My hands were shaking so badly I had to type his password twice. "There has to be something," I muttered to myself, scrolling through messages with his female employees. Sarah from accounting, Jenny from marketing, Emma from sales. But there was nothing. Just regular work conversations about meetings, deadlines, and project updates. No flirting, no secret messages, no plans to meet. I felt like an idiot. "You're losing it, Barbara," I told myself, closing the laptop. "He's your husband. He loves you. He loves Tommy." For a while, I managed to convince myself everything was fine. But then the late meeting started again. More phone calls. More secretive smiles at his phone screen. This time, I tried to check his personal phone, but it was always locked. He'd changed the password recently, claiming it was for work security. Then came that Sunday afternoon at my parents' house. It was one of our regular family visits. Mom was fussing over Tommy, Dad was watching football, and Linda was there too, looking particularly distracted. She kept checking her phone every few minutes. Suddenly, her phone rang. Linda jumped up like she'd been shocked. "Sorry, I've got to run," she said, grabbing her purse. "Super important meeting." I noticed she'd left her phone on the coffee table in her rush. I picked it up, thinking I'd run after her to return it. That's when the screen lit up with a new message. From Michael. "My love, got us a table at La Marina for 6 p.m. Can't wait to hold you in my arms again. These stolen moments are never enough." The phone slipped from my numb fingers onto the couch. La Marina. Michael's favorite restaurant. Where he'd proposed to me 5 years ago. Everything suddenly clicked into place. The familiar perfume I'd smelled on him was Linda's signature scent. The one Mom and Dad had given her last Christmas. The one she always wore too much of. My husband wasn't having an affair with someone from his office. He was having an affair with my sister. I sat in my car outside La Marina, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles were white. It was 5:55 p.m. Through the large windows, I could see them, my husband and my sister, at what used to be our regular table. Stay calm, I told myself. Just stay calm. But calm flew out the window when I saw Michael lean across the table and kiss Linda. Not a friendly peck, a real kiss. His hand was on her cheek, the same way he used to touch mine. I don't really remember walking into the restaurant. One moment I was in my car, the next I was standing by their table, watching them spring apart like guilty teenagers. "Barbara," Linda gasped. "I can explain." I didn't let her finish. The glass of red wine in front of me seemed to lift itself and splash across her perfect white blouse. Michael jumped up, and somehow my hand found a plate of spaghetti. It made a satisfying splat against his expensive suit. "You backstabbing pieces of shit," I screamed. The restaurant went silent. Michael tried to grab my arms. "Barbara, stop. You're making a scene." "A scene?" I kicked him in the shin. Hard. "You want a scene? I'll give you a damn scene." I don't know everything I said after that. It's all a blur of cursing and screaming. I remember calling them every name in the book. I remember Linda crying. I remember Michael trying to restrain me while I kicked and fought. I think the cops even came. Security eventually escorted us out. In the parking lot, Michael tried to follow me to my car. "Barbara, please, let's talk about this like adults." "Adults?" I spun around. "Adults don't sleep with their wife's sister." At home, the fight continued. Tommy was thankfully at my parents' house, my parents, who I later learned knew about the affair but chose to stay quiet. "I want a divorce," I told Michael, throwing clothes into a suitcase. He grabbed my arm. "You're not taking my son. I'll fight you on this. You just assaulted 2 people in a public place. You really think any judge will give you custody?" That stopped me cold. He was right, I'd lost control. I'd given him ammunition. "I won't give you a divorce," he continued. "And if you try to take Tommy, I'll sue you for full custody. Think about that." I needed help, professional help. And suddenly, I remembered Rachel Stevens from college. We'd studied in parallel programs. She went into law while I chose accounting. Last I heard, she'd become quite successful handling divorce cases. I found her number online and called immediately. Rachel? It's Barbara Collins, well, Barbara Mitchell now. But hopefully not for much longer. I need your help. Barbara? Oh my God, it's been ages. What's wrong? I took a deep breath. How much do you know about custody battles? That's actually my specialty, she said. Want to come to my office tomorrow? We can talk about options. For the first time since seeing that message on Linda's phone, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I could fight back after all. The courtroom felt suffocating. I sat next to Rachel, trying to keep my hands from shaking as the proceedings began. Michael sat across the aisle with his expensive lawyer, looking polished and composed in his designer suit. Rachel stood up first. Your Honor, this is a clear case of infidelity. Mr. Mitchell was caught in an intimate situation with his wife's sister, Linda Parker. This betrayal, combined with his controlling behavior throughout their marriage, makes Mrs. Mitchell the more suitable parent for their child. I felt a surge of confidence. Then Michael's lawyer called him to testify. Mrs. Mitchell completely misunderstood the situation, Michael said, his voice steady. I was meeting Linda to plan Barbara's surprise birthday party. It was supposed to be next month. We were discussing decoration ideas and guest lists when Barbara burst in and attacked us. I nearly jumped out of my seat. What? Rachel squeezed my arm, warning me to stay quiet. And this wasn't the first time, Michael continued. Barbara has a history of jealous outbursts. She's created scenes at my office parties, accused female colleagues of flirting with me, all in front of our son. Tommy is terrified when she gets like this. My parents were called to testify next. Mom walked to the stand, not even looking in my direction. Is what Mr. Mitchell saying true? His lawyer asked. Mom nodded. Yes, we knew about the birthday planning meeting. We were supposed to be there too, but we were running late. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. My own mother was lying under oath. Then Dad testified, backing up their story. But the worst was yet to come. Linda took the stand, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. Barbara has always been unstable. When we were kids, she would hit me, push me around. She bullied other children in the neighborhood too. That's a lie. I couldn't help shouting. The judge warned me to be quiet. She needs help, Linda continued. I've seen how she treats Tommy. The screaming, the mood swings. I've been worried about him for months. My parents nodded from their seats, and Mom spoke up again. We had to take Barbara to a psychotherapist when she was young. She's had anger management issues all her life. I wanted to scream. Yes, I'd seen a therapist, because I was painfully shy and had trouble making friends. Not because I was violent. Never because I was violent. Rachel squeezed my hand under the table. Don't react, she whispered. That's what they want. I sat there, numb, as my entire family painted me as an unstable, dangerous mother. Every word they spoke felt like another knife in my back. My sister, who I'd protected from bullies when we were kids. My parents, who'd driven me to those therapy sessions to help with my social anxiety. Just when I thought things couldn't get worse, Officer James Peterson took the stand. At approximately 6:15 p.m. on May 12, we responded to a disturbance at La Marina restaurant, he testified, reading from his report. The suspect, identified as Barbara Mitchell, was witnessed throwing food and beverages at two individuals while shouting obscenities. Multiple patrons reported feeling threatened by her aggressive behavior. Michael's lawyer stood up, holding a USB drive. Your Honor, we have security footage from the restaurant that corroborates these events. The courtroom lights dimmed, and my humiliation played out on the screen. There I was, screaming and throwing things, looking exactly like the unstable person they claimed I was. Your Honor, Rachel interjected, we request to see the complete footage, including the moments before this incident. My client maintains that she witnessed her husband and sister in an intimate embrace. The restaurant's security manager took the stand. I apologize, but the camera in that section was only activated by the motion sensors when Mrs. Mitchell entered. We don't have footage from before the incident. How convenient. I looked at my family, Mom and Dad sitting rigid in their seats, Linda dabbing at fake tears, Michael looking concerned and reasonable. These people who had known me my entire life, who had watched me grow up, who knew the truth, they all betrayed me. The judge's decision felt like a physical blow. Given the evidence presented, including testimony about Mrs. Mitchell's history of emotional instability and the recent violent outburst, the court finds it in the best interest of the minor child to remain in the primary custody of the father. I stopped breathing. Furthermore, Mrs. Mitchell will be required to pay monthly child support in the amount of $800. But I don't even have a job, I burst out. They made me quit. Mrs. Mitchell, control yourself, the judge warned. Your outbursts are not helping your case. I left the courthouse in a daze. I couldn't go home, it wasn't my home anymore. I couldn't go to my parents. I had nowhere to go. Somehow, I found myself at the Copper Pot, a small Italian restaurant where Michael and I used to have date nights. I slid into a corner booth and finally let the tears come. Honey, are you okay? A warm voice broke through my sobs. I looked up to see Maria, the owner, standing there with concern in her eyes. I'd always liked her, she used to slip Tommy extra cookies whenever we came in. The whole story poured out of me between sobs, the affair, the betrayal, losing Tommy, everything. Maria listened quietly, then sat down across from me. Listen, Bambina. I have a small apartment upstairs that I rent out. The tenant just moved out last week. And I need a new waitress, Jessie just quit to go to college. I wiped my eyes, staring at her. The apartment isn't fancy, but it's clean and safe. And the job, well, it's not accounting, but it's honest work. You can start tomorrow if you want. It's amazing how quickly life can change. 2 years after that horrible day in court, I barely recognized my own life. Maria turned out to be not just my employer, but my saving grace. I started as a waitress, learning the rhythm of restaurant work. It wasn't easy, my feet ached, customers could be demanding, and the pay wasn't great. But it was honest work, and more importantly, it kept me busy. Too busy to dwell on everything I'd lost. Within 6 months, Maria promoted me to administrator. You have a head for numbers, she said, referring to my accounting background. And the staff respects you. A year later, she made me restaurant manager. The promotion came with a decent raise, enough that I could finally start saving a little after paying rent and Tommy's alimony. Tommy. My heart still breaks every time I write that check, knowing it's the only connection I have left to my son. Michael made sure of that. Sorry, Barbara, Tommy's not feeling well today, he'd say when I tried to arrange visits. Oh, we already have plans this weekend. Tommy's at his grandparents'. Always an excuse. Always a cancellation. 2 years of them. I called every lawyer I could find, but they all said the same thing. Ms. Mitchell, the last one said, reviewing my file, with your history. You mean the lies they told about me? He sighed. The court doesn't see them as lies. They see sworn testimony from your family, police reports, video evidence. Before we could even think about reopening this case, you'd need extensive documentation showing you've received psychological treatment. But I'm not psychotic, I protested. I never was. I understand that, but perception is reality in family court. And right now, the perception is that you're unstable. Without proof of treatment and a very expensive legal team, you don't have a chance. I still had the small apartment above the Copper Pot. Still worked 60-hour weeks. Still sent those alimony checks like clockwork. But I hadn't seen my son's face in 2 years. I cut off all contact with my family. Mom tried calling a few times early on, but I blocked her number. I didn't want to know how Linda was doing, or if my parents felt guilty. They made their choice. They chose Michael's money over their own daughter's happiness. One night, cleaning up after closing, I found a child's drawing left behind on a table. A simple crayon sketch of a family, mom, dad, kid. I sat down right there and cried for the first time in months. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon while I was doing inventory at the restaurant. I almost didn't answer when I saw Mom flash across my screen. I'd unblocked their numbers months ago, but never responded. Something made me pick up this time. "Barbara?" Mom's voice sounded different, older, desperate. "Please don't hang up." "What do you want?" My voice came out harder than I intended. "We need to talk to you. It's important. Please, sweetheart. Please come to the house." I should have said no. After everything they'd done, I had every right to refuse. But there was something in her voice that got to me. "Fine. I'll be there in an hour." Maria gave me the rest of the day off when I told her where I was going. Walking up to my childhood home was surreal. The paint was peeling, the garden Mom had always kept pristine was overgrown, and Dad's precious car was missing from the driveway. They looked older when they opened the door, much older than 2 years should have aged them. "Sit down, Barbara," Dad said, his voice trembling. "We need to tell you everything." I perched on the edge of the sofa, my hand slipping into my purse where I'd stashed my phone, quietly starting the voice recorder app. I didn't trust them anymore, I couldn't afford to. Mom started crying before they even began. "We're so sorry, baby. We're so sorry." "Michael," Dad's voice cracked. "He offered us a deal. Said he'd buy us a new house. You know how long we've struggled with the mortgage on this place. All we had to do was help him destroy me," I finished coldly. Mom sobbed harder. "He promised it would all work out. Said once he had custody, you'd still see Tommy regularly. Said it was better for everyone." "Better for everyone?" I stood up, shaking. "I haven't seen my son in 2 years. Neither have we," Dad burst out. "He cut us all off as soon as the court case was over. Stopped answering our calls. Changed their numbers. We don't even know where they live now." "What about Linda?" I asked. "Isn't she still with him?" Mom's face crumpled. "He left her a month after the divorce was final. Said she was just a bit of fun. She had a complete breakdown. Tried to hurt herself." "We're about to lose the house," Dad added quietly. "The house he promised to buy us, it was all lies. We betrayed our own daughter for nothing." I sat there, listening to them pour out the whole ugly truth. How Michael had manipulated them. How he'd played on their financial fears. How they'd realized too late that they'd been used. "We need your help, Barbara," Mom pleaded. "Not just with money, we need to make this right. We need to tell the truth about what happened. We need to help you get Tommy back. And Linda, she needs her big sister," Dad added. "She won't talk to anyone else." I looked at my parents, these broken, foolish people who'd thrown away our family for empty promises, and felt a strange mix of pity and determination. I called Rachel as soon as I left their house. "Remember how you said we needed new evidence?" I played her a snippet of the recording. "Holy shit, Barbara," she breathed. "This changes everything. Your parents could face serious charges for perjury." "I know," I said. "But right now, I don't care about punishment. I care about getting my son back. Can you file the papers today?" The second trial felt different from the first. This time, I walked into the courtroom with evidence, not just accusations. This time, I had the truth on my side. My parents testified first, confirming everything from their recorded confession. Mom could barely look at Michael as she detailed his manipulation and lies. The court fell silent when she described how he'd promised them financial security in exchange for their false testimony. "The medical records are clear, Your Honor," Rachel presented the documentation. Barbara Mitchell attended therapy sessions from ages 12 to 14 for social anxiety and shyness. There is no history of violent behavior or aggression. Then I saw my son. Tommy was taller now, thinner than I remembered. He looked at me with uncertain eyes, like he was trying to place a face from a half-forgotten dream. My heart ached, seeing how withdrawn he seemed, nothing like the bubbly 3-year-old I'd lost. When the judge asked if I wanted to make a statement, I stood on shaky legs. Your Honor, I've waited 2 years to see my son. 2 years of cancelled visits and denied calls. But looking at my family now, I see that everyone has suffered. I took a deep breath. My parents are elderly and sick. They made a terrible mistake, but they've lost everything because of it. My sister's mental health has been severely damaged. I'm asking the court to show mercy in their sentencing. The judge's verdict came swiftly. My parents received a suspended sentence and a $50,000 fine. Linda was sentenced to 2 years of correctional labor and mandatory psychiatric treatment. Michael's punishment was more severe, a $500,000 fine and 2 years in prison for orchestrating the perjury and deliberately alienating a child from their parent. The look on his face when they led him away, I'll never forget it. The court awards full custody of Thomas Mitchell to his mother, Barbara Mitchell. Those beautiful words I'd waited 2 years to hear. That was 6 months ago. Today, Tommy and I live in a beautiful apartment that I bought with the settlement money from Michael. It's not as grand as our old house, but it's ours. Really ours. The restaurant continues to do well. Maria made me full partner last month. Between my salary and the settlement, I can easily manage the mortgage payments. Tommy's starting to come out of his shell, making friends at his new school. I heard through the grapevine that Michael's business collapsed while he was in prison. His parents called once, asking to see Tommy, but I refused. They knew what their son had done and stayed silent. They don't get to be part of our lives now. As for my own family, I don't know how they're doing. I don't want to know. Maybe someday I'll be ready to forgive them, but not yet. Not while the wounds are still healing. I'm Charlotte, and I grew up in a small town where everybody knew everybody else's business. My sister Elizabeth is just a year older than me, and growing up, we were actually pretty close, or at least I thought we were. Our parents were hardworking folks, both putting in long hours at the local factory. We weren't rich by any means, but we got by okay. The real highlight of our weeks was Sunday dinners at our grandparents' place. Mom's parents lived right next door to us. Those dinners were something special. Grandma would cook up a storm, and Grandpa would tell us stories about the old days. I always loved those gatherings, sitting there at their big oak table, surrounded by the smell of home-cooked food and the warmth of family. Elizabeth was always more interested in her phone than the family conversation, even back then. God, these dinners take forever, she'd whisper to me, scrolling through her social media feed under the table. I could be hanging out with my friends right now. Time flew by, and before we knew it, Elizabeth was heading off to college to study management. She was all about the glamorous life, always dressed to the nines, and posting perfectly filtered photos on Instagram. I followed her a year later, but my path was different. I chose to study design. Our parents had saved up enough for both of us to attend decent public colleges. Nothing fancy, but solid schools that would give us a good education. Your sister's going to be a successful businesswoman, Mom would tell everyone proudly. And Charlotte, well, she's always been good with her hands. I didn't mind the comparison back then. I was too busy falling in love with design, sketching wedding dresses in the margins of my notebooks during lectures, and dreaming about creating beautiful things. Little did I know how different our paths would become, or how one family dinner would change everything. Looking back now, I can see the signs were there from the beginning. Elizabeth was always chasing the spotlight, while I was content working behind the scenes. But when our grandparents called us all together for a special dinner after graduation, neither of us had any idea how our choices would end up tearing our family apart. The restaurant was packed that evening, but all I could focus on was the envelope Grandpa was holding. When he finally cleared his throat and stood up, the whole family fell silent. Elizabeth, Charlotte, he said, his voice filled with emotion, your grandmother and I have watched you both grow up, graduate college, and become beautiful young women. We want to help you start your lives right. He handed each of us an envelope. There's $50,000 for each of you. Use it wisely. I nearly choked on my water. $50,000? That was more money than I'd ever seen in my life. Elizabeth, on the other hand, barely waited for dessert before she started planning. I'm opening an exclusive clothing store, she announced, already scrolling through her phone. High-end brands, designer collections. It's going to be amazing. Have you done any market research? I asked, remembering her business management classes. She rolled her eyes. Please, Charlotte, I know what sells. Trust me, this is going to be huge. And just like that, Elizabeth was off and running. She rented this ridiculous space in the most expensive part of town, the kind of place where you feel underdressed just walking past the windows. Every day, her Instagram was flooded with new posts: Elizabeth posing in designer clothes, Elizabeth at business meetings, Elizabeth calling herself a young CEO building her empire. Look at this marketing campaign I'm launching, she told me one day, showing me the thousands she was spending on social media ads. I've hired the best sales team in town. We're going to be the next big thing. Meanwhile, I took my time. I spent weeks researching, making spreadsheets, and running numbers. My dream had always been different. I wanted to create wedding dresses, to be part of someone's special day. I found this tiny space, nothing fancy, but it had good natural light and potential. I drew up the plans myself, creating a cozy workspace with a comfortable waiting area for brides. I reached out to Maria, an amazing seamstress I'd known for years, who had more experience with wedding dresses than anyone in town. Charlotte, this could really work, she said as we set up the studio. You've got the eye for design, and I know how to bring your sketches to life. I also called Sarah, my best friend from design school. Want to help make some brides really happy? I asked her. She was on board immediately. We started small. No flashy advertising campaigns, just a simple website and some local flyers. Our first bride came through her cousin, who'd seen our workshop and liked how personal it felt. Then her friend came, and her friend's sister, and slowly, through word of mouth, we started building a reputation. You're doing this all wrong, Elizabeth said when she stopped by one day. Where's your social media strategy? Your brand positioning? You need to think bigger. But I was thinking different, not bigger. Every dress we made was unique, every bride special. While Elizabeth was posting about being a girl boss in her designer outfits, I was sitting with real women and listening to their dreams about their perfect wedding dress. The first year was tough, but rewarding. We started with simple designs at reasonable prices, just trying to get our name out there. I remember our first $1,000 dress. The bride hugged me so hard after the final fitting, I thought she might never let go. Charlotte, you've made my dream come true, she said, twirling in front of the mirror. Word spread quickly after that. By the second year, we were getting more elaborate requests. Can you do hand beading? Is it possible to add custom lace? Of course we could. Maria's skills were incredible, and Sarah had a real talent for details. We started doing bridesmaid dresses too, it just made sense when brides kept asking. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's Instagram posts were getting desperate. The designer clothes in her photos were the same ones over and over. Her exclusive store was empty most days. I'd walk past sometimes and see her sitting alone at the counter, scrolling through her phone. Then one day, Mom called me in tears. Your sister's in trouble, Charlotte. She's losing everything. Elizabeth had blown through the entire $50,000, plus loans she'd taken out. The expensive rent, the unsold inventory, the massive advertising campaigns, it all caught up with her. Her empire collapsed in just 3 years. I don't understand, she sobbed at a family dinner. I did everything right. I had the perfect location, the best brands. Everything except actually running a business, I thought, but kept my mouth shut. She looked so different now, no more designer clothes, no more perfectly staged photos. Depression hit her hard. That's when Mom and Dad started their campaign. "Charlotte, honey," Mom began one evening at their house. "Your sister needs a job, and you need a manager. It's perfect. She could help you expand the business." The pressure was constant. Elizabeth started showing up at the studio unannounced, critiquing everything from our booking system to our window display. "You really should be more active on social media," she'd say, "or this space is too small for a successful business." Finally, during yet another family dinner where they were all ganging up on me, I snapped. "Are you kidding me?" I stood up, my chair scraping against the floor. Elizabeth couldn't keep her own business afloat for 3 years. She burned through 50 grand plus loans on Instagram ads and designer clothes. She never did market research, never tracked inventory properly, never built real relationships with customers. "And now you want her to manage my business?" Elizabeth's face crumpled. "You think you're so much better than me, don't you?" "No, I just think you're a terrible businesswoman. You can't manage my studio, you couldn't even manage your own store." The silence that followed was deafening. Elizabeth burst into tears and ran from the room. Mom was shaking with anger. "How dare you speak to your sister that way?" Dad thundered. "After everything she's been through?" "Everything she's been through?" I grabbed my purse. "You mean everything she did to herself?" "I'm done. Done with the guilt trips, done with the pressure, done with all of it." I walked out that night, and I haven't been back since. 3 years of hard work building my business, and my family wanted to hand it over to the person who'd proven she couldn't handle it. 3 years can change a lot. My little studio wasn't so little anymore. We'd expanded into the space next door, hired 2 more seamstresses, and had a waiting list months long. Our dresses now started at $8,000, and nobody blinked an eye. Quality speaks for itself. "Charlotte, we need to raise our prices again," Maria told me one morning. "We're turning away too many brides." She was right. Between her masterful sewing, Sarah's eye for detail, and my designs, we'd built something special. Each dress was a work of art, and word had spread far beyond our little town. I was reviewing some sketches when the message popped up on my phone. "Elizabeth." My stomach did a weird flip when I saw her name. We hadn't spoken since that night at our parents' house. "No, hi, no, how are you?" "Just, I'm getting married in 2 months, and I need a wedding dress." "Can you do it?" I nearly dropped my phone. "Elizabeth? Getting married?" Last I'd heard through Mom's occasional updates, which I never asked for but got anyway, she was working some office job and still living in her old apartment. 2 months? I typed back. "Elizabeth, we usually need 5 to 6 months for a custom dress. There's a whole process, multiple fittings, adjustments." Her response came immediately, "Come on, Charlotte. We're sisters. Or are you too successful now to help your own family? Must be nice being so successful you can turn away your own sister." I stared at the message for a long time. The old Charlotte would have fired back something nasty. But I'd grown up a lot in 3 years. "Let me check my schedule," I wrote instead. I spent that night reworking our entire production timeline. We had a bride, Jessica, whose dress was scheduled to start next week. I'd have to call her and explain we couldn't take her order after all. "I'm so sorry," I told Jessica the next morning. "I know this is unexpected. I'd like to give you this custom veil as an apology, it's one of our best pieces. And I have a colleague who does beautiful work, she can make your dress exactly as we planned." Jessica was disappointed but understood. I shifted 3 other dresses around, knowing we'd be working overtime for weeks. "Are you sure about this?" Sarah asked when I told her about Elizabeth's dress. After everything that happened? I wasn't sure. But I replied to Elizabeth's message, "Okay, I'll make your dress. Come in next Tuesday at 10 a.m. for measurements." The response was just, "Great, make it good." No thank you. No acknowledgement of the massive favor I was doing her. just entitlement, same as always. But something made me want to do this, maybe curiosity, maybe hope, maybe just the chance to prove something to myself. When Elizabeth came in for her first appointment, I decided to do something I'd never done before: offer a family discount. A big one. The dress you want would normally be $10,000, I explained, showing her my sketches. But I'll only charge you for materials and seamstress time. $5,000. Elizabeth barely glanced at the price. Oh, that's fine. Richard, my fiancé, can easily afford it. He's loaded. Owns half the commercial real estate downtown. That was the beginning of what felt like an endless stream of fittings and alterations. Elizabeth was in the studio constantly, always wanting to tweak something about the dress. The neckline needs to be lower, she'd say one day. No, higher, the next. Can we add more beading? Different lace? More sparkle? At first, it was exhausting. But gradually, something shifted. Between fittings, Elizabeth would plop down on our plush consultation sofa, kick off her shoes, and talk. And talk, and talk. Richard's such a bore, she'd say, rolling her eyes while Maria pinned her hem. All he does is talk about business and golf. But his bank account? She'd make a chef's kiss gesture. That makes up for everything. I kept my face neutral, focusing on adjusting a seam. You don't think that might be a problem? Please, you know what's a problem? Being broke. Besides, you should see his family. His sister, Elizabeth lowered her voice conspiratorially, goes to therapy twice a week. Like, how messed up do you have to be? The gossip was endless. Richard's mother was trying too hard to stay young. His father was probably having an affair with his secretary. Her friends weren't spared either, she had a nickname for each one, usually focusing on their insecurities or failures. Jenny Bad Botox Miller is going to be so jealous of this dress, she'd laugh. And Sarah Forever Single Thompson? She's going to die when she sees me walking down the aisle. I should have been put off by all of it. The old me would have called her out, started another fight. But something held me back. Maybe it was the way she'd automatically reach for my hand when she saw herself in the mirror. Or how she'd bring me coffee, remembering exactly how I liked it, when she came for fittings. Small moments like these made me think maybe, just maybe, we were finding our way back to being sisters. Sure, the gossip made me uncomfortable, and her attitude toward her fiancé worried me, but wasn't this what I'd wanted? A chance to repair our relationship? So I nodded and smiled, letting her chatter fill the studio while the dress took shape under my hands. With each fitting, each coffee, each shared memory, I felt the wall between us crumbling just a little bit more. Things were looking up. Elizabeth and I even reconnected on social media. Suddenly my feed was full of her engagement photos and wedding planning updates. She'd tag me in posts about the dress, always with lots of heart emojis and best sister ever captions. Mom called me one evening, sounding happier than she had in years. I'm so glad you girls worked things out, she said, her voice thick with emotion. This is all we ever wanted, you know. Our family back together. Dad even stopped by the studio one day, awkwardly hovering near the entrance, before pulling me into a tight hug. We missed you, kiddo, he mumbled into my hair. It felt good. Really good. Like maybe the past 3 years of silence had been worth it if this was the result. A week before the wedding, Elizabeth called me. The dress is ready, right? She asked, excitement bubbling in her voice. I'm having my bachelorette party tomorrow night at Moonlight Bar. Can you bring it? I want all my girls to see it. The next evening, I carefully packed the dress into our nicest gift box, the one with our studio's gold logo embossed on cream-colored paper. I'd spent countless hours on this dress, the hand-beaded bodice, the delicate lace overlay, the subtle shimmer in the train. It was some of my best work. The taxi dropped me off at Moonlight Bar, and I could hear the party before I saw it, laughter and music spilling out onto the street. Inside, a group of women in matching team bride t-shirts crowded around tables decorated with pink balloons and scattered rose petals. Elizabeth squealed when she saw me. "Girls, girls, the dress is here." They gathered around as I carefully lifted it from the box. The reaction was everything a designer could hope for: gasps, sighs, a few tears. "Elizabeth, it's absolutely gorgeous. I've never seen anything like it. The detail work is incredible. Your sister is so talented." The dress made its rounds, each bridesmaid taking turns holding it up and admiring different aspects. I felt proud, not just of the dress, but of this moment. Standing here with my sister, sharing in her happiness. When the dress was safely back in its box, I grabbed a glass of wine from the bar and found an empty chair at one of the tables. The night was young, the mood was festive, and for the first time in years, I felt like I truly belonged in my sister's life again. I was just getting comfortable, taking my first sip of wine, when I felt a harsh tug on my arm. Elizabeth stood over me, her perfectly made-up face twisted into an expression I knew all too well from our childhood: pure disdain. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed, her manicured nails digging into my arm. "Having a drink?" I said, confused. "Celebrating with you?" Elizabeth let out a sharp, cruel laugh that made several heads turn. "Celebrating? With me? Oh honey, you're not a guest here. You're the seamstress. You delivered the dress, now it's time for you to go." The wine glass nearly slipped from my hand. "What?" "Ladies," Elizabeth announced to the room, her voice dripping with fake sweetness, "I think there's been a misunderstanding. Charlotte isn't joining us. She's just the dressmaker I hired. You know, like when the caterer drops off food? They don't stay for the party." The silence in the room was deafening. Some of the women looked uncomfortable, others confused. One of them, who I now recognized as Richard's sister, Amanda, gave me a sympathetic look. "All this playing nice, the coffee dates, the sister bonding?" Elizabeth continued, waving her hand dismissively. "That was just business. I needed a dress, you needed a customer. Let's not pretend it was anything more." Something snapped inside me. 3 years of silence, followed by months of fake reconciliation, it was too much. If she wanted the truth out, fine. Let's have all the truth. Just business? I stood up slowly, setting my wine glass down with deliberate care. "Okay, Elizabeth, let's talk business. Let's talk about how you've spent the last 2 months telling me what a boring, pathetic man your fiancé is." Elizabeth's face went pale. "Charlotte, don't you dare." "Oh, what was it you called him? A walking ATM? A necessary evil?" "Ladies, did you know Elizabeth doesn't even like Richard? She just likes his bank account." Amanda stood up from her seat, her face shocked. Elizabeth tried to interrupt, but I was on a roll. "And Amanda," I turned to her, "your future sister-in-law here has some lovely opinions about you." "What was it you called her, Elizabeth? The crazy one, foot? The family nutcase who needs therapy twice a week to function?" Amanda's hand flew to her mouth. "Is that true?" "I have proof," I said, pulling out my phone. "Elizabeth's been sending me voice messages for months. Want to hear them?" Before Elizabeth could stop me, I played the first message. "God, Amanda is such a mental case. Richard says she's been in therapy for years. Can you imagine being that messed up?" Then another, "Jenny's Botox makes her look like a surprised fish. At least she'll look appropriate when she sees my dress, her jaw's already permanently dropped." And another, "Sarah's so desperate to find a man, she'll probably try to catch the bouquet before I even throw it." What a pathetic spinster. One by one, the women around the room recognized Elizabeth's cruel nicknames and comments about them. Jenny touched her face self-consciously. Sarah wiped away tears. Amanda grabbed her purse and ran out the door. "These are your friends," I said, my voice shaking. "Your bridesmaids. And this is how you talk about them behind their backs." The room erupted into chaos. Women were grabbing their bags, some crying, others yelling at Elizabeth. Elizabeth stood in the middle of it all, her face contorted with rage and panic as her carefully constructed world fell apart around her. "She's lying," she screamed. "Charlotte's making this up because she's jealous." But the voice messages were still playing, her own voice, condemning her with every word. I picked up my purse and the empty dress box. At the door, I turned back one last time. "By the way, you haven't paid for the dress yet. I'll send you the invoice, full price this time. No family discount for someone who isn't really family." The morning after the bachelorette party disaster, my phone rang at 7 a.m. Mom's name flashed on the screen. "What have you done?" she screamed before I could even say hello. "Elizabeth is hysterical. The wedding might be called off." "How could you ruin your sister's special day?" I sat up in bed, suddenly wide awake. "How could I ruin it? Are you kidding me? Amanda won't even speak to her. Half the bridesmaids have dropped out. This is all your fault." The familiar anger bubbled up, the same feeling I'd had 3 years ago. Of course it's my fault. It's always my fault, isn't it, Mom? Never precious Elizabeth's. Not when she bankrupted her business, not when she treated me like dirt, not when she spent months trash-talking her fiancé and his family. And by the way, she hasn't even paid for her dress. Charlotte. No, Mom, I'm done. Elizabeth made her bed, now she can lie in it. And you and Dad? You're just as bad, always taking her side, always making excuses for her. I'm done with all of it. A week passed, then another. I threw myself into work, designing new dresses, meeting with brides who actually appreciated what I did. I tried not to think about the wedding that may or may not have happened. Then, 3 weeks after the bachelorette party, Mom's number appeared on my phone again. I almost didn't answer. "Charlotte?" Her voice was different this time, quieter, hesitant. "I owe you an apology." She told me everything. The wedding had happened, but it was a shadow of the grand event Elizabeth had planned. Richard had forgiven Elizabeth, but his parents and Amanda didn't attend. Most of the bridesmaids backed out. The church was half empty. "I was wrong," Mom said, her voice cracking. "I've always been wrong about Elizabeth. I see that now. I just wanted both my girls to be happy. I am happy, Mom. Without Elizabeth in my life." There was a long pause. "I know. I transferred the money for the dress. Full price, $10,000. Thanks." After that, we found a new normal. I started visiting my parents again, but only when I knew Elizabeth wouldn't be there. Apparently, she did the same. We developed an unspoken schedule. She got holidays, I got Sunday dinners. When we accidentally crossed paths, we acted like polite strangers. Mom tried to tell me about Elizabeth sometimes, her marriage problems, her struggles to fit in with Richard's social circle. I always changed the subject. Her life wasn't my concern anymore. My own life? It's pretty great. The studio is thriving, we're looking at expanding to a second location. I'm dating this incredible guy who designs custom furniture, he gets the whole creative business thing. Last month, one of my dresses was featured in a major wedding magazine. Sometimes, late at night, I think about that bachelorette party and wonder if I did the right thing. But then I remember Elizabeth's voice in those messages, the casual cruelty, the fake sisterly bond, and I know I did. Sometimes the best family is the one you choose, the friends who become sisters, the colleagues who become family. Yesterday, I hired 2 new seamstresses. Next week, I'm meeting with a real estate agent about a space in the city. Life moves forward, with or without the people who once held us back. I've always wondered what it feels like to be truly loved by your mother. Don't get me wrong, I had a mother who provided for my physical needs and made sure I excelled in school. But emotional warmth? That was reserved exclusively for my younger sister, Rachel. Our family seemed perfect on paper. Dad worked as a senior executive at a consulting firm, Mom managed our beautiful suburban home, and Rachel and I attended the best private school in the district. But it was much more complicated than it seemed at first glance. "Olivia, your math test results are excellent," Mom would say with a cursory glance at my report card, before turning her attention to Rachel's latest finger painting. "Oh, sweetie, look at these colors. You're such a talented artist." I still remember the way she'd spend hours in Rachel's room, helping her arrange her art supplies or listening to her practice singing. Meanwhile, my achievements, straight A's, debate team victories, science fair medals, were acknowledged with nothing more than a distracted nod. Dad was different. James Preston loved both his daughters equally, but his constant business trips and late nights at the office meant we rarely saw him. When he was home, he'd try to make up for lost time. "How's my little lawyer doing?" he'd ask, ruffling my hair as I pored over my homework. "And where's my future Broadway star?" he'd call out to Rachel. But these moments were fleeting, like scattered photographs in an otherwise empty album. The only person who truly saw me was Grandpa William, Dad's father. He and my Grandma Helen lived across town in a beautiful Victorian house that always smelled of pipe tobacco and old books. In my early years, before everything changed, he'd visit regularly. "You're special, Olivia," he'd tell me, his blue eyes twinkling. "Smart as a whip and twice as sharp. Don't let anyone dim your light." But then came that day, I must have been around 7, when I overheard the argument that would change everything. Grandpa and Mom were in the kitchen, their voices rising above the usual household sounds. "You can't keep this up forever, Catherine," Grandpa had said, his usually gentle voice hard as steel. "Stay out of my personal life," Mom had hissed back. "You have no right to interfere." I didn't understand what they were fighting about then. Shortly after, Grandma Helen passed away from a heart attack, and Grandpa stopped coming to our house entirely. One evening, I overheard Mom on the phone with her friend Sandra. "Thank God that arrogant old man finally got the message," she'd said, her voice dripping with disdain. "I'm completely done with his meddling." When I asked about visiting Grandpa, Mom's response was immediate and severe. "If I ever find out you've been to see him, there will be serious consequences, Olivia. Do you understand?" I nodded, fighting back tears, not comprehending why my mother would keep me from the one person who seemed to truly understand me. But I was young, and fear of my mother's punishment kept me in line, at least for a while. The years passed slowly until I turned 16, when I finally found a way to reconnect with Grandpa William. I got a job as a waitress at the Morning Brew, a cozy cafe just a few blocks from his house. It wasn't hard to convince my parents I was working extra shifts. Mom barely paid attention to my schedule anyway, and Dad was too busy with work to notice. "I'll be home late today," I'd say casually over breakfast. "Jenny called in sick, so I'm covering her shift." Mom would just wave her hand dismissively. "Make sure you're keeping your grades up. We don't want this job interfering with your studies." But instead of working those extra shifts, I'd slip away to Grandpa's Victorian house. The first time I knocked on his door, my heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst. "Olivia?" His eyes had widened in surprise, then filled with tears. "My God, look at you. You're all grown up." That afternoon turned into countless others. We'd sit in his study, sharing cookies he'd bought specially for my visits, and he'd tell me stories about his youth, about Dad when he was young, about his travels around the world. Sometimes he'd slip me small gifts, a vintage book, a delicate bracelet, a fountain pen. "This was your grandmother's," he said one day, pressing a silver locket into my palm. "She would have wanted you to have it." We never talked about Mom or Rachel during these visits. If I ever mentioned them, his face would darken and he'd quickly change the subject. I learned not to bring them up. When I turned 18 and got accepted to State University, everything changed. Moving into the dorm gave me the freedom I'd craved for so long. During my first week of college, I decided it was time to stop hiding. "Mom," I announced during a weekend visit home, I've been seeing Grandpa regularly, and I'm going to continue doing so. I'm an adult now, and I get to choose who I want in my life. Mom's face turned red with anger. After everything I've told you about staying away from him? How dare you go behind my back? Catherine, Dad interrupted, looking tired but firm. Olivia's right. She's an adult now, and William is my father. If she wants to have a relationship with him, that's her choice. Mom stormed out of the room, but I felt lighter than I had in years. Finally, I could visit Grandpa openly, without the weight of secrecy. Our relationship grew even stronger over the next year. I'd visit him between classes, and we'd spend hours talking about everything and nothing. He'd become not just my grandfather, but my closest friend and confidant. That's why his death hit me so hard. It happened suddenly, a massive heart attack while he was working in his garden. One moment he was there, vital and full of life, and the next, gone. I got the call during my morning lecture, and my world stopped spinning. I remember running out of the classroom, barely able to breathe, barely able to think. All those years of secret visits, of stolen moments, of finally being able to love him openly, and now he was gone. The lawyer's office felt suffocating as we all gathered for the reading of Grandpa's will. Mr. Harrison, a silver-haired man who had been Grandpa's attorney for decades, sat behind his mahogany desk, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he prepared to read the document. Dad sat rigid in his chair, his face a mask of grief. Rachel fidgeted nervously beside Mom, who kept shooting me suspicious glances. I stared at my hands, trying to hold myself together. Shall we begin? Mr. Harrison cleared his throat and started reading. I wasn't prepared for what came next. None of us were. I, William Preston, being of sound mind, hereby bequeath all my property and assets to my granddaughter, Olivia Preston. The silence that followed was deafening. I looked up to see everyone staring at me. The inheritance included the Victorian house, his investments, savings, everything. Nearly $1.50 in total. Dad's face showed surprise, but he remained quiet. Rachel's eyes were wide, but she too said nothing. It was Mom who exploded. This is absolutely outrageous. She shot up from her chair, her face contorted with rage. How dare he leave everything to her? What about Rachel? What about James? This is completely unfair. Catherine, please. Dad tried to calm her, but she was beyond reason. No, she whirled to face me. You have to share this with your sister. Half of it should go to Rachel, it's only fair. You can't possibly keep all of this for yourself. I sat there, overwhelmed. Of course I cared about Rachel, but this was Grandpa's decision, his last wish. Mom, Don't you mom me, she snarled. You manipulated him, didn't you? All those secret visits over the years, you turned him against us. Mrs. Preston, Mr. Harrison intervened, the will is legally binding. Your father-in-law was very clear about his wishes. The rest of the meeting passed in a blur of legal terms and paperwork. Mom continued to fume, while Dad and Rachel remained silent, though I could see the hurt in their eyes. The next morning, I returned to Mr. Harrison's office alone. I needed to understand more about the will, about possible ways to handle this situation that wouldn't tear my family apart. Miss Preston, Mr. Harrison said, studying me carefully over his glasses, there's something else you need to know. He reached into his desk drawer and pulled out a small brass key. Your grandfather left this for you. It opens the safe in his office. He was very specific about this, he said you'll find answers to all your questions there. I drove to Grandpa's house in a daze, the key feeling impossibly heavy in my pocket. The Victorian house stood silent and empty, dust motes dancing in the afternoon sunlight that streamed through the windows. My footsteps echoed on the hardwood floors as I made my way to his office. The safe was hidden behind a painting of the sea. I'd always admired it during our talks, never knowing what secrets lurked behind it. My hand shook as I inserted the key into the lock. Inside, I found 2 items, a letter addressed to me in Grandpa's familiar handwriting, and a thick manila envelope. My dearest Olivia, the letter began. I sank into his leather chair, the paper trembling in my hands. If you're reading this, then I'm no longer here to tell you this in person, something I've wrestled with for years. What I'm about to share will be difficult to read, but you deserve to know the truth about our family. I continued reading, each word hitting me like a physical blow. Grandpa explained how he'd hired a private investigator years ago, driven by suspicions he couldn't ignore. Suspicions about Rachel's paternity. The evidence was undeniable, he wrote. Your mother had been having an affair for years with a man named Michael Pearson. But the true shock came when I discovered that Rachel was born from this relationship. My hands were trembling so badly now that I had to put the letter down for a moment. I opened the manila envelope, and dozens of photographs spilled out. There was my mother, years younger, in intimate embraces with a tall, dark-haired man I'd never seen before. Along with the photos were DNA test results, one for me, one for Rachel. The clinical language spelled out what Grandpa had already revealed. I was James Preston's daughter, but Rachel was not his child. The truth hit me like a tidal wave. All those years of coldness, of distance, of obvious favoritism, suddenly everything made horrible sense. Mom couldn't love me because I was the daughter of a man she didn't love. Rachel was her precious child because she was born from her affair with the man she did love. Memories flooded back, Mom's constant criticism of me, her endless praise of Rachel, the way she'd light up when Rachel entered a room while barely acknowledging my presence. It wasn't just favoritism, it was the physical reminder of two very different loves. As I continued reading Grandpa's letter, the full scope of our family tragedy unfolded before my eyes. The argument I'd witnessed as a child suddenly made painful sense. Your mother blackmailed me that day, Grandpa wrote. She said that if I told James about her affair and Rachel's true parentage, it would destroy him. She begged me to keep quiet, saying she'd ended the relationship with Michael and wanted to preserve her marriage. My hands trembled as I read about how Grandpa had decided to remain silent, not for my mother's sake, but to protect his son and grandchildren from a truth that would shatter their world. But the weight of this secret had claimed another victim. Your grandmother Helen, the letter continued, had always been sensitive to family matters, and her heart condition made her vulnerable. When she discovered Catherine's betrayal, the shock was too much for her. She died of a heart attack that same night. This is something I could never forgive your mother for. Tears blurred my vision as I read about Grandma's death. I remembered her warm smile, her gentle hands, the way she'd brush my hair while humming old lullabies. Her death had always seemed sudden, but now I understood the tragic truth behind it. My dearest Olivia, Grandpa's letter went on, I'm leaving you my entire fortune not only because I love you deeply, but because you are truly my own blood. You are James's daughter, a true Preston, and I know you will handle this inheritance with wisdom and grace. However, I want you to know that you have complete freedom to share this money as you see fit. My only wish is that you use this truth to bring justice to our family, in whatever way you deem right. The letter ended with a final apology for burdening me with such a heavy truth, but I knew there was no turning back now. After a sleepless night spent processing everything I'd learned, I made my decision. The following Saturday, I drove to my parents' house, the envelope of evidence tucked securely in my bag. Mom answered the door with her usual cold demeanor, but this time it didn't hurt like it used to. Now I understood why she'd never been able to love me properly. We need to talk, I said firmly, following her into the living room where I'd spent so many years trying to win her approval. There's nothing to talk about, she snapped. You need to share the inheritance with Rachel, or I'll take legal action. You can't keep all of it for yourself. I took a deep breath. I know everything, Mom. About Rachel's real father. About your affair with Michael Pearson. About how Grandma died. The color drained from her face, but she quickly recovered. What ridiculous nonsense are you talking about? Grandpa hired a private investigator, I continued, my voice steady, despite my racing heart. I have the photos, the DNA tests, everything. And I'm willing to share the inheritance with Rachel, but on one condition, you need to tell Dad and Rachel the truth. Mom's face contorted with rage. How dare you try to blackmail me? Do you think I'd risk losing my marriage and my relationship with Rachel just because you're threatening me? Go ahead, try to destroy me. I'll make sure everyone knows what a greedy, manipulative person you really are. Nobody will believe you anyway. They'll believe the DNA tests, I said quietly. Get out of my house, she screamed. And don't think for a moment that I won't fight back. I'll destroy your reputation before you can destroy my life. That evening, as I sat in my dorm room trying to process our confrontation, my phone started buzzing with notifications. When I opened Facebook, my heart dropped. Mom had posted a lengthy status update about me, and it was already gathering attention. I never thought I'd have to write this, her post began, but I need to warn everyone about the cruel and manipulative behavior of my own daughter. Olivia has shown her true colors by turning my father-in-law against our entire family in his final years, manipulating him into leaving her everything in his will. She's refusing to share anything with her innocent sister, showing just how greedy and heartless she's become. The post went on, painting me as a master manipulator who had somehow brainwashed Grandpa. She secretly visited him for years, poisoning his mind against us, all for money. Now she's trying to tear our family apart with ridiculous accusations and lies. This is not the daughter we raised. My hands shook as I scrolled through the comments. Aunt Sarah, I always knew there was something off about that girl. Uncle Robert, disgusting behavior, you and James raised her better than this. My cousin Jennifer, money really does show people's true colors. Even my mother's best friend Sandra chimed in, she's always been a difficult child, Catherine. Now everyone can see what you've had to deal with. The shares kept multiplying. Relatives I hadn't seen in years were weighing in, each comment more vicious than the last. Mercenary, selfish, money-grubbing, she should be ashamed. Family friends I'd known since childhood were suddenly experts on my character, all agreeing that I was a manipulative gold digger who had somehow managed to trick a sharp-minded man like Grandpa William. I closed my laptop and lay back on my bed, staring at the ceiling. Mom thought she was destroying me with this public shaming, but all she'd done was make my decision easier. After 3 days of careful planning, I picked up my phone and called home. Mom answered on the second ring. What do you want? Her voice was cold. I've been thinking, I said, keeping my voice steady. Maybe you're right. Maybe we need to talk this through as a family. I'd like to come home for dinner, try to make peace. Just the four of us. How about this Saturday? I'll come early and help you cook. Saturday works, she said, her voice notably warmer. I'll make your favorite lasagna. Perfect, I said, allowing a small smile to play across my lips. I'm looking forward to clearing everything up. After hanging up, I walked to my desk and opened Grandpa's envelope. Everything I needed was right here. Mom thought she'd won this round with her social media attack, but she had no idea what was coming. Saturday's dinner would change everything, and this time I would be the one in control of the narrative. Saturday evening arrived with a heavy tension in the air, though I was the only one who knew what was coming. Mom had indeed made lasagna, and the familiar scent filled our dining room with an almost cruel sense of normalcy. We sat around the table, Dad at the head, Mom to his right, Rachel beside her, and me across from them. Before we eat, I said, setting down my fork, I'd like to say something. Mom's smile was triumphant as she reached for her wine glass. Of course, dear. I've done a lot of thinking, I began, watching her carefully. About family, about fairness, about what Grandpa would have wanted. I paused, noting how Mom's smile widened. I'd decided that the inheritance should be split equally between Rachel and me. Oh, Olivia, Mom exclaimed, practically glowing with satisfaction. I'm so proud of you for making the right decision. I knew you'd eventually see reason and do the honorable thing. Rachel gave me a tentative smile, while Dad nodded approvingly. You know, Mom continued, clearly unable to resist the moment, this shows real maturity. I'm glad you finally felt ashamed of your earlier behavior and came to your senses. I let her words hang in the air for a moment, a slight smile playing on my lips. Her victory speech made what was coming next even more poetic. Actually, I said softly, there's something else everyone needs to hear. I reached into my bag and pulled out Grandpa's letter. There's a reason Grandpa left everything to me, and it's time you all knew what it was. Mom's face went pale. Olivia, don't. But I was already reading. My dearest Olivia, what I'm about to share will be difficult to hear, but you deserve to know the truth about our family. As I read about the private investigator, about Michael Pearson, about the affair, I glanced up occasionally. Mom's eyes were fixed on the tablecloth, her face alternating between ghostly white and burning red. Dad's expression changed from confusion to shock to rage. Rachel's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of the table. The DNA tests confirmed everything, I continued, my voice steady. Rachel is not James's daughter, but the child of your mother's lover. This is absurd. Mom tried to interject, but her voice quavered. I have proof, I said, pulling out the envelope. Photos of you with Michael Pearson. DNA test results. Dad snatched the envelope from my hands, his fingers shaking as he pulled out the contents. The photos spilled across the table, Mom in the arms of a dark-haired man, kissing him, walking with him, dozens of stolen moments captured by the investigator's camera. The DNA results followed, their clinical language confirming everything. How could you? Dad's voice was barely controlled fury. All these years, all these lies. I can explain, Mom sobbed, mascara running down her cheeks. James, please, it wasn't what you think. I was young, I was confused. Confused? Dad roared, standing up so quickly his chair crashed to the floor. You had an affair, got pregnant, passed another man's child off as mine, and you call that confused? Rachel pushed away from the table and ran upstairs. Mom tried to follow her, but Dad blocked her path. Don't you dare, he growled. Don't you dare run after her now. You've done enough damage. Mom remained standing by the table, sobbing and begging for forgiveness. The months following that fateful dinner were a blur of legal meetings and family upheaval. Dad filed for divorce almost immediately, his lawyer citing years of deception as grounds for claiming the majority of their shared assets. Rachel and I met at a quiet cafe a week after the revelation. She hadn't stopped crying since that night. I don't even know who I am anymore, she whispered, staring into her untouched coffee. You're my sister, I said firmly, reaching across the table to take her hand. Maybe not by blood, but by heart. That's never going to change. We spent hours talking that day. I showed her Grandpa's letter again, explaining everything in detail. How he'd discovered the truth, how it had affected Grandma, why he'd kept silent all these years. I want you to have half the inheritance, I told her. Grandpa left that decision to me, and you're my sister, regardless of DNA. Rachel burst into fresh tears, but this time with a smile. True to my word, I split the inheritance equally with Rachel. We used some of the money to help Dad start over. He'd moved into a small apartment and needed to rebuild his life from scratch. The social media storm reversed course dramatically once the truth came out. All those relatives who'd been quick to condemn me suddenly fell silent, then started sending apologetic messages. Olivia, I'm so sorry for what I said, Aunt Sarah wrote. I had no idea what your mother had done. We should have known better than to judge without knowing the full story, Uncle Robert messaged. You showed remarkable strength and dignity through all of this. Even Sandra, Mom's best friend, reached out. I defended Catherine for years, never knowing the pain she caused you. I hope you can forgive my harsh words. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I wonder if I did the right thing. Was it worth tearing our family apart? Was revenge worth the pain it caused Rachel, the destruction of my parents' marriage, the public scandal? But then I remember the years of emotional neglect, the way Mom manipulated everyone around her, the pain she caused Dad with her decades of deception. I think about Grandma Helen, who died because the truth was too much to bear. I remember Grandpa, carrying this burden alone for years, trying to protect everyone until the very end. No, I didn't do this for revenge. I did it for justice, for Dad, who deserved to know the truth about his marriage, for Rachel, who deserved to know her real identity, for Grandma, whose death deserved to be understood, and for Grandpa, who trusted me to set things right. Mom still lives in town, but I haven't spoken to her since that night. Sometimes I see her posts on social media. She's crafted a new narrative about being the victim of a vindictive family, but few believe her anymore. The truth has a way of standing firm against lies, no matter how skillfully crafted. Dad, Rachel, and I have grown closer through all of this. We have weekly dinners together, supporting each other as we continue to heal. Rachel is studying art therapy now, using her own experience to help others deal with family trauma. Dad has started dating again, slowly learning to trust.